Happy Friday, and thanks for joining us this October 15th. I'm Anna Orsini. If you like warmer weather, this weekend may be sounding pretty good to you, and if you don't, you may not have to wait too long for it to change. Before we head over to Jeff, let's talk about vaccines, because many people have been wondering if a booster is something they will need. So starting off on our vaccine watch, we have just learned that Johnson & Johnson did get that emergency use authorization recommendation from an expert medical panel. This is separate from the FDA, so they actually give their recommendation to the FDA, which the FDA then decides whether or not they will act on. It's a little bit different than what they initially expected for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. People who are 18 and older who did receive that initial shot will be able to get that booster dose. However, because this was a one-dose shot initially, people will now be able to get that shot 2 months after they got their initial one instead of waiting 6 months like we've seen with other vaccines. This, of course, follows an announcement yesterday about the Moderna vaccine. So what we learned on the Moderna vaccine is that people can actually now get that Moderna booster if it is approved by the FDA. With the Moderna booster, it's going to be different than the initial vaccine as well. They did make a unanimous decision about those booster shots yesterday. It was a 19-0 vote. So what Moderna was actually doing is seeking emergency use authorization for a half dose of its vaccine. So instead of the 100 micrograms that the initial vaccine was, it will now be 50. The advisory panel did vote in favor, so they will then pass that recommendation on to the FDA. This is for people in specific groups, however, anyone who's over the age of 65 or people who are considered to be high risk. With the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, again, it is anybody over 18, but for the Moderna booster shot, they recommended it for the specific two groups. The FDA, as we mentioned, does typically follow the panel's advice, so they should rule on this within a few days. But remember that ultimately, regardless of whether these vaccines were recommended for booster shots, it will be up to the CDC. So this is just step one of a multi-part process. Everyone who is meeting today is part of an independent medical panel who simply makes that recommendation, and then the next step is for the FDA to actually authorize it, which they do expect to happen in the next few days, because that's typically what they have done before. The CDC would then have to sign off on it. A meeting of its own committee of vaccine experts is actually scheduled for next week as far as the CDC goes. So the hope is that if approved by the CDC, the booster shots could begin sometime in early November.